I'll tell you.
You're watching CW Montana. This is the MTN 9 o'clock news.
Well, good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Russ Riesinger. Here's what's topping headlines across Montana on this Friday. The drifter who abducted and murdered a former Bighorn County sheriff in Billings was sentenced today. Butte first responders got lifelike training for crisis intervention scenarios today, focusing on people who have mental issues. But first, people from across Montana gathering in Helena to advocate for maintaining public lands in the state. MTN's Jonathan Ambarian was there as more than 1,000 took part in the Rally for Public Lands.
On Friday, the Montana State Capitol Rotunda was crowded for the third Rally for Public Lands. Senator Jon Tester opened the event, pointing to Montana's public lands as an economic asset.
Our public lands power $7 billion a year in Montana's economy. How many jobs it create? 73,000, okay? So there's your statistic.
He called on Congress to reauthorize the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which expired last year. Maggie Carr, an outfitter from Choteau, said her business and her community rely on public lands like the Bob Marshall Wilderness.
And the trickle-down effect to my community is real. Our business employs other locals and generates money that is spent locally, which helps keep our small towns alive.
Organizers estimate at least 1,800 people were in attendance for the rally. Margaret Webster came in from Billings with signs she made herself.
Because once they're gone forever. And we can't afford to lose them. That's one of the most important heritages of our country, is our public lands.
The event closed with a speech from Governor Steve Bullock. He said the federal government shutdown is having clear negative effects on Montana communities that rely on tourism.
Our parks and our public servants are not bargaining chips for policies.
He called on those in attendance to oppose any proposals to transfer public lands.
We cannot and we must not leave to our kids and grandkids anything less than the unrivaled outdoor experience and heritage that our parents and grandparents worked so hard to preserve for us.
In Helena, Jonathan Ambarian, MTN News.
Well, Senator Steve Daines sent out a statement today saying in part that he's also committed to protecting public lands. That includes reauthorizing the Land and Water Conservation Fund and supporting the Yellowstone Gateway Protection Act. Well, today, a handful of U.S. senators make a push to permanently end government shutdowns. Among them, Senator Daines of Montana and Wyoming Senators Mike Enzi and John Barrasso. The End Government Shutdowns Act would permanently prevent federal government shutdowns. It would do that by creating an automatic continuing resolution for any regular appropriations bills that would keep the federal government open when budget negotiations cannot be resolved before key spending deadlines. Well, Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Tester tells MTN he has supported similar legislation in the past, and he also supports this current bill. A North Carolina transient who abducted and murdered a former Bighorn County sheriff this summer in Billings is sentenced to life in prison. This afternoon, convicted killer Donald Gray told Judge Gregory Todd he deserved life in prison, and the judge agreed. Joy, who served 25 years in law enforcement, including a 4-year stint as the Bighorn County sheriff, was killed back on June 10th. Police say that Gray abducted Joy outside of a post office on 15th Street West in Billings, stabbed him to death, then dumped his body at a local middle school. Documents state Gray told officers it all started because he was not familiar with the area and needed a car to get back to North Carolina. It was an emotional day in the courtroom, as you might expect, as the family of William Joy faced his killer. MTN's Samantha Sullivan takes us there.
On June 10th, 2018, our lives were changed forever. That was the day you decided your own selfish needs and desires were more valuable than the life of our father, William Joy.
The family of former Bighorn County Sheriff William Joy, remembering him as a kind man, a man of God, serving communion to thousands of hospital patients at Billings Clinic, and in his 80th year, becoming a Franciscan brother, planning to provide services to the Crow Nation.
A good man who worked for years trying to prevent people like you from hurting others. A man who was dedicated to his family, to his community, and to his church.
The family says Joy was never hurt during his 25 years in law enforcement, making it even more difficult to comprehend how he died in this way.
And I hope and pray that as the years comes that I can understand how this all fit in. But right now, I don't see that.
As Donald Gray sat and listened, he rarely looked up to face the family of the man he took away. Denise Joy says he never looked her in the eye.
I think that once a person has crossed that line and taken a life, no feelings of that loss really touch them very deeply. So I have no idea what would possess or what thought process or why someone would do something so awful.
There's one thing we know for sure. Our Father, William Joy, is in heaven right now, praying for your soul, and hoping one day you'll seek the forgiveness of God and reach heaven. That's the kind of man he was.
In Billings, Samantha Sullivan, MTN News.
Well, attorney Ed Zink tells MTN Gray will soon face a murder charge for the death of a North Carolina woman. Once he's sentenced in that case, he'll be brought back to Montana to serve out his life sentence. The Cascade County Sheriff's Office is hiring. They're looking for 10 detention officers and 3 deputy sheriffs. New Sheriff Jesse Slaughter says applying to be a detention officer is a great way to get a foot in the door if you hope to work in law enforcement.
Working in any type of law enforcement or corrections job is very satisfying. You truly get an opportunity to protect the public and serve the public, provide them good customer service. It's very rewarding.
People interested can apply online for one position or both. Applicants must have a good work ethic, a high school diploma, and be a United States citizen. Well, police generally try to avoid violent encounters with individuals going through mental health issues. MTN's John Amey shows us how a special training program helps officers de-escalate a situation before it becomes violent.
Police often respond to scenes that are out of control. This is why they train to end conflict peacefully before it escalates into violence.
Drop the gun! Push the gun away from you.
Law enforcement in Butte went through a week-long Crisis Intervention Team, or CIT training, which teaches officers how to deal with someone going through a crisis situation.
And that ranges from somebody who has been diagnosed as bipolar, paranoid schizophrenic, things of that nature, to just having a bad day, lost their job, and they've been put into crisis.
The final day of the training involved several scenarios in which participants acted out police calls in which someone was having a mental health crisis. CIT training was started years ago to curb violent and sometimes deadly encounters between police and people with mental issues.
In 1989, when I started, things were a little different. If we responded to certain situations, the idea was to grab the person and restrain them as quickly as possible, and then kind of work through the situation to see why they were doing whatever it was they were doing.
For the past 5 years, Butte Police have held this training to learn how to communicate with someone in distress and resolve a situation without violence.
So we're to the point after 5 academies that about 99% of our department's gone through this training.
They call this scenario the train wreck, and it is quite a train wreck. It's very chaotic, and officers sometimes encounter situations that are really out of control, and they have to learn to de-escalate it.
We're able to de-escalate somebody who's highly agitated without even having to touch them and plug them into the services they need. We're that much farther ahead. They're not at risk, we're not at risk, and we're not housing them in the jail when they really don't belong there.
Keeping the peace. In Butte, John Amey, MTN News.
Well, that training also included detention officers, dispatchers, and mental health professionals. Now that Bozeman will have 2 high schools, the school district has come up with a transfer policy. In the next couple of weeks, the boundaries determining which high school students will go to will be chosen. After that, students will have to attend the school that they've been assigned unless they put in a transfer request with the school district. Superintendent Bob Watson said a transfer could be due to several reasons, including safety, health, and many other factors.
I think the one we're going to see most of is the sibling exception. So if I had an older sister or brother at the school and I was supposed to go to the other one, I could request to stay at that school with my sibling, which is something we try to do. We try to honor those requests at the other grade levels.
The school board is allowing people to put in transfer requests, but is not encouraging it. Well, coming up, the Hamilton mayor has an ambitious plan to develop a beautiful stretch of public park in the Bitterroot Valley. We're going to show you that just ahead. But first, Bob McGuire delivering your weekend weather forecast. We'll be right back.